I have in my hand a pen. It looks like an arrow, of course. It's from Nottingham Castle, and I got it from years and years ago when I was a child. So I found that today in my room, and it inspired me to talk about Robin Hood. Not what I usually talk about, I know. I usually talk about King Arthur, but I thought I'd change things up a bit. So the one particular aspect of Robin Hood that I wanted to talk about was the merry men, because there's a particular theory which I think is especially convincing about the origin, the historical origin of the merry men. So in one of the earliest tales of Robin Hood, it mentions that there are 143 men dressed in green, led by Arthur. They're outlaws, seeking the king's pardon. And it's set not in Sherwood Forest, but in Barnsdale Forest, in Yorkshire. And then it also mentions that the king is called Edward, though it doesn't specify which Edward. But it says that the king stayed in Nottingham for 2 weeks. So this would indicate that it was Edward II, because he stayed in Nottingham for 2 weeks exactly in 1323. So there's a good case to be made for the earliest tales of Robin Hood being set in that year, 1323, or round about that year. And that's what many people believe. So bear that in mind. Remember that date, that year, 1323, because it will be relevant. So here's where the historical facts start having an impact, maybe. There was a war called the Despencer War in 1322, or at least that was its climax. I'm not sure if it started a few years before then. But it was between Edward II and Thomas of Lancaster, the Earl of Lancaster, and a few other people as well. They were the rebels against the king, King Edward. And the rebels are recorded as having dressed in green. And then after the battle of, I'm not sure how you say it, but after a particular battle, which was the final one, which led to Thomas's defeat, he fled into a town and stayed there overnight. But then during the night, a large portion of his army, remember dressed in green, fled. And then the next morning, Thomas was captured and then subsequently executed, and all his supporters were outlawed. So just think about that. You have, also I forgot to mention this happened in Yorkshire. So yeah, think about that. You have in 1322 an incident where there is a whole bunch of men from an army, all dressed in green, who flee in Yorkshire, and obviously they would become outlaws, since after Thomas's defeat all his supporters were outlawed. And then in the Tales of Robin Hood, you have them set in the next year, 1323. You have a whole bunch of people, an organised group of fighting men, all dressed in Lincoln green, outlawed, seeking the king's pardon. Surely it seems like more of a coincidence, more than a coincidence, that these two things would correspond. So, well, that's a theory. I mean, for me personally, I think it's quite convincing, but maybe it's not the only theory out there, but still at least worth mentioning.